introduction.
Welcome everyone. Everyone is filling in, waiting for everyone to kind of join us. Hope everyone is having a great day. I'm so excited to have everyone here for our July National Volunteer Call. I see so many faces I recognize and so many new ones, which is also very exciting. My name is Tina, and I am the North Carolina organizer, and my pronouns are she, her. I'll also be the moderator for this call, and we're going to have a lot of great speakers and resources for you today. But first, I want to know you all, and with there being so many people, we're going to have to do this via the chat box. So I'm going to do a countdown in a few seconds, and what I want each of you to do is to post your name, pronouns, state, and your favorite season. Again, that's your name, pronouns, state, and your favorite season in the chat box. On the count of 3, 3, 2, 1, post. Wow. I just see Zara, Tabitha, Chloe. Hey, Chloe from North Carolina. And Simone in Colorado. Autumn would be my favorite season too in Colorado, I'm sure, versus the humidity and heat here in North Carolina. I see Abigail from Nevada. She likes the summer. And Liz in New Hampshire likes the summer too. Renee from Phoenix. Stephanie in San Diego likes the winter. I went to law school for a bit in San Diego, and the winters are nicer out there. Okay, in Ohio likes the winter. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Well, it was great getting to know you all. Keep sharing. Share in. Before we do launch into the content of the call, I want to go over some housekeeping items. If you are not a designated speaker, please keep yourself muted throughout the call. Okay, and also, we just used the chat box to do intros. I'm hoping you all can continue the conversation in the chat box. If there are, however, any appropriate comments, we will have to close the chat box off. If that happens, you will still be able to message the host. And lastly, security. We've seen other organizations experience interruptions from trolls during video calls, and we have taken steps to prevent these attacks. Our moderators are prepared to boot any trolls, but here are 3 things that you can do if trolls interrupt our space. Number 1, you can turn off the volume on your computer or your phone. Number 2, you can also minimize the panel where you can see other participants in case anything graphic pops up on a participant's screen. And finally, we'll post the welcome slide if there's an interruption. When we remove the image, you'll know it's safe to turn your audio back on and rejoin the call. Now, I know this all may sound very scary or uncomfortable, but we shouldn't be discouraged by these trolls. And in fact, it is a reminder of why the work that we do is so necessary. So now I'm so excited to kick off this call with an overview of the Fight for Her, and then you'll get to hear from our amazing guest speakers. So, who we are. The Fight for Her campaign is a campaign of Population Connection Action Fund. And we have a team of amazing organizers in 8 states and 9 cities. And we are the only group that is doing on-the-ground grassroots activism to repeal devastating policies like the Global Gag Rule and the Helms Amendment. Our goals for this campaign are to, number 1, institute a permanent legislative ban on the Global Gag Rule via the Global Her Act. How many of you have heard of the Global Gag Rule before? I see a number of you have. That's great. The Global Gag Rule defunds healthcare clinics around the world for even mentioning the word abortion. And it has left whole communities without access to family planning and preventative health care like ovarian cancer screenings, and as well as HIV/AIDS relief efforts. But we on the Fight for Her campaign are fighting to pass the Global Her Act to block the Global Gag Rule and make it so that no other president can unilaterally impose it again. So this is important work. Our second goal is an increase in U.S. foreign aid for international family planning to $1.6 billion a year, including $111 million for the United Nations Population Fund. And lastly, we want to repeal the Helms Amendment to end the prohibition on foreign aid for abortion overseas. And actually today is a really big, exciting day for us because the House just introduced a bill to repeal the Helms Amendment. So super exciting news. You'll hear more about that later. So what can we do? What you can do to make a difference is organize, 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 organize. We can't say that enough. We, with the Fight for Her campaign, have been on the ground for 3 years working tirelessly to pass the Global Her Act and repeal Helms. Thanks to all of your hard work, here's some of what we've accomplished. We've engaged 54,000 constituents. In addition to that, we've placed 184 media hits. And we've previously held 2 full-day organizing Her summits and trained 700 volunteers. Stay tuned to the end of this call so you'll hear more about the Her Summit. Trust me, you do not want to miss this. We switched our organizing to go digital in response to COVID. And just last week, y'all, we had almost 400 people attend IG Live town halls. And I want to give a quick shout out to the amazing Congresswoman Alma Adams of North Carolina for her unwavering support and the campaign video that she sent in support of our town hall. In addition to that, we've built people power, and a campaign our size will definitely make a huge difference this year. Thank you to all volunteers on this call. You guys are amazing. You're going to get to hear from some great guest speakers, but make sure you stay tuned to hear how you can take action. And with that, I'm going to toss it to my lovely colleague, Tricia, who will moderate the guest panel. Take it away, Tricia.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us today while we learn more about reproductive justice together. This is an important conversation and one that is more timely and pressing than ever, given the momentum that the Black Lives Matter and racial justice movements have picked up in response to the murder of George Floyd 2 months ago. Racial justice is a reproductive rights issue, and at Fight for Her, we're continually working to ensure that it's central to our fight. The global gag rule and the Helms Amendment are policies steeped in racism and colonialism, and these policies deny millions of Black and Brown people around the world the agency and autonomy over their health and lives, with the assumption that US lawmakers know better than patients and their doctors. To fight for her is to fight to end racial injustice in US global health assistance. And to that end, we must continue to listen, learn, and do the work to be actively anti-racist so that we can fight back against these policies effectively and inclusively. So that's why we have these 4 amazing speakers joining the call to discuss the reproductive justice movements, both here in the US and around the world. So we have Maya Hart, the North Carolina coordinator at SisterSong Women's Reproductive Justice Collective, Jessica Roach, and Dorian Wingard, the CEO and COO of Restoring Our Own Through Transformation, or ROOTT, and Dr. T, who is not only a South African OBGYN and author, but also the newly appointed Special Rapporteur to the Right to Health at the United Nations. Thank you all so much for joining us. So I have a few questions prepared, but we also want to hear from you. So if you have a couple of questions for our speakers, drop them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. So let's get started. So our first question for all of our speakers is, what does reproductive justice mean to you?
I'm happy to go first, but is it easier for you all to call on us? I can't see the other panelists, so I just want to do what's easiest for you all.
That's actually a great question. I was going to ask the same. Maybe it would be a good idea for you to just kind of to guide who you would like to speak first, and we definitely defer to Dr. T right now since she was the first to speak up.
Sure. Okay. So Dr. T, you want to go first?
Hi,
Sorry.
everyone. No problem. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to join you all. I remember very well 3 years ago when I was attending Capitol Days in Washington with you all at Pop Connect, and how this was just a dream, and it's just incredible that we are sitting here today after such an historic day, an historic moment. And, you know, for myself, sitting in Johannesburg in South Africa, it's often, you know, people wonder, why do you even care what happens in the US? Why does it matter what happens at the, you know, at Congress and all of those spaces? And it matters because as a medical doctor, the global health funding that, you know, comes through my country, South Africa, directly impacts my ability to be a good doctor. It directly interferes with my ability, you know, to offer patients information, referrals, and clinical care, and be involved in any advocacy work related to abortion. And so it's important to talk about, the geographical locations, right? Beyond just the marginalization and the vulnerability of people who require abortion. But let's be truly inclusive. We have to talk about how far-reaching the impact is of global health aid, but also the harmful, laws such as the global gag rule. And I think reproductive justice is important because not only does it center the right to health care and reproductive health rights, but it really is in an intersectional movement which ties in social justice, economic justice, labor rights, because, issues of safe communities, the fact that, the right to make choices about our bodies is simply not enough for many people around the world. And in Johannesburg, in South Africa, and across the country, we do need more than just the ability to make a choice. And I'm quite happy that we have this discussion today, and I'll share more details about my own lived experience and how these issues impact me, and why this is an important historic day, and why the benefits are really more than just in US-based base. We all benefit. The whole world will benefit from the work that all of you are doing. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Do you want to go to Jessica and Dorian next?
There we go.
Hi, sorry, technology. Thank you so much. So,
Go.
So for us, the broad scheme of being a reproductive justice and birthing justice organization is we're very much rooted in being Black-led and looking at all of the aspects that impact us. So for us, it's a huge discussion around, and Dr. T alluded to it, in safety. So it's not only the ability to choose how or when and if we create a family, but it really is about making sure that we have our own safe and sustainable communities. We were just actually having this conversation yesterday about some of the initiatives that are necessary, that are put on our community, in particular inside of Ohio, but some of the work that we do nationally when we have the discussions surrounding maternal and infant mortality, in particular when it comes to Black families, has everything to do with talking about us at a deficit, which in and of itself is racism at its core, which is what we always discuss, is that it's not really race that's a health risk factor, it's racism. And so having to look at all of the issues that surround us. So not only whether or not we're having access to care, but are we actually receiving respectful care and quality care? So moving the conversation into that, not just having conversations about lack of affordable housing, but how it is that policies have been created that have kept us from being able to have home ownership and develop generational wealth intentionally to do so, looking at the intersection of law enforcement violence and how it negatively impacts our communities overall at a disproportionate rate, and has a very direct correlation and relationship to our access, our statistics when it comes to maternal and infant health. And then also just the right to privacy, and again, privacy and respectful care. I mean, we have decisions that we make within our families about how it is that we're going to develop our family and what decisions come from those and why it is that we make them. And they're not always just the standard banners of pro this or anti that. It really has to do more with the overall arching themes of things that impact us on a daily basis, and having to make sure that we address all of the factors that come into play. So for us, reproductive justice really starts to answer and directly gets to the core of who we are as a people and why it is that we need to have all life domains addressed, not just specific siloed issues, because we're not a siloed people, and we're not monolithic, and we have multiple things that impact us on a daily basis and our decisions that we make. I think that's good.
I think that's good. I think that's good. I mean, the only thing I would add to that is that for us, it also speaks to how we do not view our communities or our families from a perspective of a deficit. We don't assume that they are not empowered enough to make those decisions for themselves. In addition to that, we don't subscribe to the misnomers that we are fractured to the extent to which we are situated in a deficit either. We make sure that we acknowledge the fact that our families are who they are, that they have the compositions that they are, and that fathers aren't absent in this process. We're ever present is more now than we've ever been. So, you know, with what Jessica said and what I've just added, I mean, that for us is the perspective, the context for reproductive justice for ROOTT.
Great, thanks. And then we'll go to Maya.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Y'all have all touched on what I wanted to say, but just real quickly, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Maya. I use any pronouns, and I'm the North Carolina coordinator with SisterSong Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. And we are a Southern-based national membership organization, and our purpose is to build an effective network of individuals and organizations to improve institutional policies and systems that impact the reproductive lives of marginalized communities. And so SisterSong defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. And the safe and sustainable part is really what is at the root of the definition, which again, folks have touched on before me. But for me, reproductive justice means freedom for all oppressed people. So when I imagine what full reproductive freedom actually looks and feels like, I think of all people having access to all of our basic human needs, like food and housing. I think about Black people in particular feeling safe every time they leave their home, and Black birthing people having access to Black midwives and Black birth workers who prioritize their safety and well-being. I also imagine a world without prisons and police, where historically oppressed people can attend to their families and communities without fear of violence, and being able to live beyond having to make ends meet.
So we've definitely already touched on this, but how is racial justice an integral part of reproductive health and rights? And do you want to start with Jessica and Dorian?
Well, I think part of that question can be answered when you actually take a look at those that created the framework surrounding reproductive justice and how it was first born. If you're talking about who we call the mothers of reproductive justice, it was very much rooted in the voices of Black women throughout the diaspora and being able to address levels of autonomy, respect, and care. And I think that often gets missed in this conversation as we move forward, that we're not really getting back to the core of what reproductive justice came from. And so that's where that's an absolute necessity when you're talking about racial justice, because it was really talking about the overall oppression of Black women and Black people, and how it is that throughout we have been oppressed. We've either had our reproductive health dictated to us, we've had it stolen from us, we've had it raped from us, we've had choices been taken away from us. We have not been historically in the positions to be able to have what it was that we needed addressed for ourselves. Even with the initiations of certain policies, they didn't necessarily have that framework of us as a people in mind. It came out of some levels of other movements that were always able to gain more traction, basically because they come from PWIs. And so for us, it's really clear in how it is that we address, and because we're an unapologetic Black organization, very specifically serving our Black communities, because we want to really delve into what we're talking about when we're dealing with equity, and equity across the board, and not just health equity, but the right to choose and have options, not just options that are given to us, but options that we get to create for ourselves. And that's where that intersection, when you're talking about racial justice, comes into play, because we have historically been an oppressed people that have not been given the same opportunity, that have not been given the same, and at this point, it can't even be about the same opportunity. It has to be allocation of resources that are greater in order to create that balance. And that's not going to happen through equality, that's going to happen through an equity lens.
Oh, you nailed it. You got it.
And we can go to Maya next.
Sure. Yeah, so similarly, I think that by definition, reproductive justice requires that we center the experiences of historically oppressed people, like Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, queer people, disabled people. So racial justice is really part of the definition and, you know, the birth of what reproductive justice is. We can't talk about reproductive health and reproductive rights without considering who actually has access to these services. So that means who can afford them, who can safely travel to their appointments, and who has historically been barred from such access. So as advocates of reproductive health, rights, and justice, we have to be organizing through a racial justice lens, or we're perpetuating the same harm caused by centuries of white supremacy and violence within and outside of the healthcare system.
Great, thank you. And then we'll end with Dr. T.
Yeah, I think it's important because, you know, when you're talking about public health service and how this started to become a problem for South Africa particularly, is that at the height of the HIV you know, response around the world, there was this need to strengthen health systems. And because the governments in many global South countries are failing to really cater to the needs of the people, this dependency on international NGOs started to become really normalized, right? And so what then started to happen is that when government failed to meet the needs of the citizens, NGOs and global health funding supported local organizations and local service providers then enter into the healthcare service or the public healthcare service. Now, if all of those NGOs then sign on to the global gag, and in order to get that money, it means that the state is actually failing in its own duty, firstly to provide services, but secondly to uphold the constitution. Because in South Africa, there's no doubt that the right to health, including reproductive health, is a constitutional right. We actually have a specific policy, the Choice on Termination of Pregnancy Act, which gives the details of how and who and when and how a safe abortion is performed. And so I think we need to understand that for us, and that's why for me, as a medical doctor who's been an independent medical practitioner and activist for many years, why my advocacy had to take on this form, where I now find you know, similar organizations, institutions such as yours, and other, you know, Black-led and women of color-led movements in the US, because I realized that for me and my patients to have justice, we needed to follow the money trail, because there is power in money. And that was what has led me to this movement and to belong to this community right now. And Maya spoke about the different vulnerabilities, right? And I always talk about patient profiles. So if you're talking about a person who may need HIV treatment, you're talking about a person who may need cervical cancer screening, a transgender person who may need affirming health care. Those things are related, because it may look like it's an abortion issue or a policy that's blocking abortion access, but it's really all about autonomy. It's about fighting and blocking dignified care. It's about blocking advancements in medicine, in medical research, right? In development around abortion care specifically. Because those women too, and those people too, need to be able to have services and care in a dignified manner, in a private manner. But what's happening in South Africa is that despite our own constitution, despite our own Choice on Termination of Pregnancy Act, we find this anti-choice attitude and the stigmatization of abortion becomes embedded. It becomes part of the system, and it gets even harder for individual patients to then advocate for themselves. Hence, we have to join the global community to ensure that we deal with where the money is coming from. And reproductive justice forces us to talk about root causes. You can't be for reproductive justice if you don't believe in reparations, if you don't believe, right, in Black Lives Matter, if you don't want to talk about the issue of white supremacy, and even before Trump. But Professor Loretta Ross has a very beautiful essay talking about white supremacy in the Trump era, specifically on the expanded you know, global gag. So reproductive justice really forces us to talk about why is it that African countries are just seen as spaces to be extracted from. it may look like these issues are not connected, but the issues of minerals, the issues of economy, the issues of representation in positions of leadership that has the necessary authority to take actions. All of these things are needed. And we've all seen how in the world it doesn't help just to have a marginalized person in a position of power or leadership. You need actually the authority to make those decisions that are required. And so I think for me, it is important to talk about the origins of reproductive justice and why it was important, so that we don't get it to be diluted in the same manner that intersectionality has been diluted. And I'm talking about Professor Kimberly Crenshaw's work, right? That we don't present these principles as if they are brand new. We need to be building, but in order to build, we have to talk about what was the origins, what was the actual aim of all of this, and link all of the issues. We have to link the issues of climate change, for example, the issues of menstrual health and hygiene products, right? And that's kind of how I think we will eventually get to a place where we are actually not so heavily dependent as the countries in the global south in global, foreign aid in the very first place.
Great, thank you. I think that leads really well into my next question, which is, how is the reproductive justice movement connected to the Black Lives Matter movement here in the US? And we can start with Maya.
Awesome, thank you. I'm really excited about this question because I just think so much, there's so much intersection between the movement for Black lives and the current political moment that we're experiencing right now with uprisings across the country and the world, and reproductive justice. So I want to return to the definition that we gave earlier about reproductive justice being the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. So when we say safe and sustainable, that means living free from fear of violence from individuals or the state. The movement for Black lives is also fighting for a world where Black people can exist and experience joy and freedom without suffering from violence from the state. And in particular, we're talking about the violence inflicted on our communities by the prison and police systems. So in order to achieve full reproductive freedom, oppressed people must be able to access their most basic needs without being surveilled and policed. And these are things that both the movement for reproductive justice and the movement for Black lives are fighting for.
Great, thank you. And then we can go to Jessica and Dorian.
So I think that Maya gave a great synopsis and overview of where there is the levels of intersection. And as we know, the Black Lives Matter movement in and of itself has also evolved to take on multiple different issues and has evolved in how it is that it manifests itself currently in the US. And for us, it's almost like, not necessarily to be like dismissive of the question, but it really is just, it's almost like a no-brainer. I mean, it really is. And that's just to be completely honest and upfront. Like, it doesn't have to have a significant level of complexity in the discussion. Reproductive justice is justice for Black lives. It is rooted and grounded in justice for Black lives and justice for oppressed peoples. And it is very, very clear when we're talking about it from the perspective of the work that we do in ROOTT, which we didn't give a formal introduction to, so I know that that might actually be a challenge in closing the gap, that it's really clear that we place the value upon the resource and access that we have inside of our own communities, and that we be allowed to utilize, not only allowed, but we actually, for me, it's a demand that we are centered and how it is that we want to conduct our lives, how it is that we want to create our families, what that looks like, the choices, our autonomy in those choices, access to reproductive health and healthcare across the spectrum. So that's really, I mean, that's incredibly clear. We have these siloed conversations where we take out abortion as if it's not part of the reproductive health spectrum, and it is part of reproductive health. And that's where, again, it comes into play, where our lives distinctly matter because of the decisions that we make and have the choices that we deserve to have in levels of equity in moving forward to be able to create the safe and sustainable communities that we want to see for ourselves under the definitions that we have for us.
Great, thank you. And then we can go to Dr. T.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think positionality-wise, you know, being outside of the US, you know, I'm relying on sort of social media and, you know, mainstream news networks. But I think I can draw on from our own experience, you know, for racial justice in South Africa, and how for many years we thought we were done, you know, with the fight. And just to realize that as Black women, particularly as queer Black women, you know, there is another fight in terms of the gender, right, and all those issues, and how we experience patriarchy from all spaces, and how organizing, you know, isn't always easy when you are talking about issues of abortion, worker rights, you know, and of course issues of decriminalizing sex work in many countries on the African continent. And I think for me it's a moment that even in South Africa we had a lot of support for Black Lives Matter, and it's again Black women, you know, who are leading in that fight, who are organizing, who are putting their bodies on the line. And I'm not sure if it was just a social media amplified issue, but even within Black Lives Matter, it seems that there needs to be a big deliberate discussion, right, around issues of autonomy, bodily autonomy for Black women, for queer people, for gender non-conforming people, particularly around this issue of abortion. It's not as if you're letting the movement down because you are pro-choice and you are pro people having safe abortion, you know. But again, I'm looking at this from outside, so I'm not really sure if, you know, what I'm seeing on social media is a true reflection. But I do know for sure that from my experience in South Africa of the racial oppression and the racial you know, discrimination and fighting apartheid, that we find ourselves now in the center of issues of gender-based violence and femicide, right, of predominantly Black women, and what that means, you know, when we are just constantly unable to move, you know, in our communities, in our homes, in churches, and we are just not safe anywhere. And I think for me, it's to bring that gender lens, you know, and center all of those people who are vulnerable, whether by race or gender or class, through all of the movements that we build. So we don't have to feel like we have to choose, you know, one over the other in the same grouping. You know what I mean? If all of us are our rights are protected and promoted, then we all stand to benefit. And I think the gender discussion is an important one to have always, and not just leave it behind or assumed that everyone understands, or, you know, what the gender issues are about.
Great, thank you. And so our next question is, how does reproductive justice apply around the world, or outside of the United States? Is there a place for this framework there? And we can start with ROOTT if you guys are available. We can go back, and do you want to start with Dr. T then?
So for me, you know, when I was in medical school, I already knew and felt deep in my gut that the undergraduate curriculum was not preparing me for the world out there. It wasn't preparing me for the patients who needed me to be there for them as a medical doctor. And the shock of it all, when I started to learn about issues of the global gag, and I was at a university that was really the global hub in Africa for biomedical technology development and research for HIV, and how it didn't make sense to me, you know, how the health system was already at that time disintegrated. You know, it's almost like abortion care was like this stepchild that no one wanted to talk about. And so my learning of reproductive justice, my learning of all of these issues of intersections and, you know, centering the margins, I had to Google this stuff and YouTube it. So I used to watch Professor Kimberly Crenshaw on YouTube and, you know, look for open access of her lectures, and Loretta Ross and all the other, women of color who were really the backbone of this framework for all of us. And that's when I felt seen, and that's when I felt heard, and I felt like, okay, so this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm looking for. Because even our own medical curriculum is still very much Eurocentric, and it's still not really designed to take into account and to fully respect issues of indigenous health system, right? The fact that most of the patients, before they come to me, they've probably gone to a traditional African doctor. And what does it mean, if we're going to ignore and erase the entire African medical indigenous system? And it's about racism again, where there's this hierarchy of knowledge and erasure of scholarship of Black people, and how that directly impacts patient outcomes, right? Health outcomes. And I found that it was through reproductive justice and using this framework in one-on-one with the patient in a consultation room, up to a point where, after about 5 years of this, I felt, okay, I need to get out there in the real world and do the fight, because the one-on-one advocacy wasn't working anymore. But I really do think that there's a place for it, because vulnerability is universal. It's a human right. And my belief is that when you can center all of your solutions around restoration of dignity, then we will start to change things. If it's about control, if it's about judgment, it's about stigma, we're not going to move anywhere. So for me, it's about the restoration of dignity and centering that, regardless of anyone's vulnerability, because being vulnerable is part of the human experience. That's what makes us human. But it's how we deal with that as a system. And I found that for me as a medical doctor, I couldn't stay in a public health system that demanded of me to deny patients dignified care, to deny them information, and go up, by the way, in terms of my medical ethics, that's unethical to do those types of things. And I couldn't, as an individual medical doctor, continue in a public health system that required that, to do that to myself. I was that young 25-year-old person when I started practicing that needed this very information. And the fact that I had the privilege of medical education, of course, was a privilege, but it was unfair that others who didn't have this information, who couldn't outsource their services to private clinics, were then left out to literally die. Because I think this is what the conversation about. Often it does lead to death. And sometimes there's a lifelong complications, infertility issues, right? Issues of chronic pain. And if you're restoring dignity, you will know that even though someone didn't die, it's about the quality of life. What life are they living? And so for me, these are the types of questions, and that's how I started to engage with the framework of reproductive justice all the way in South Africa. And now it's to try and get this, to get into the undergraduate curriculum, so that we have a crop of doctors and medical students and nursing students who understand what this is, and they understand the power that they have and that they can use to then change lives.
Great, thank you. Maya, Jessica, Dorian, do you guys have any thoughts?
Could you repeat the question? I want to, because I had to step up and take a call. I want to make sure.
Sure, no problem. So it was just a question about, like, does reproductive justice, can we apply it around the world outside of the US?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a simple yes. It can be. Now, the how is a different question. And in fact, I don't think it's a question that we sitting here in Ohio in the States can answer for the rest of the world, because that's a pretty arrogant thing to do. But the application of the right to reproduce when, where, and if, and how you decide to do that is a universal, inalienable right to any human being across the globe. But even if we are able to establish that type of parity and removing that type of inequity, for us here at home, there's still a need to deconstruct so many layers of infrastructural oppression, infrastructural racism, institutional oppression, institutional racism, all of those things that go along with impacting the quality of care persons may receive inside of a healthcare structure, and they can be received, and the types of resources that are applied there. So, the simple answer to your question is yes. Now, the nuances of the how is the part of the conversation that actually requires a little bit more detail.
And I think just to add to that, because it is really important to take a look at it from what is the global perspective, but also understanding what and what issues are inside of each community. We talk about this
because they're unique.
And they're unique. There are the overarching that we can always talk about. We can always do the 30,000 foot, but we need to also be clear that we here, and we talk, that we in Columbus, Ohio can't necessarily dictate or say what is necessary under a reproductive frame in South Africa. We can't necessarily say that we can't say what that reproductive justice framework looks like in San Francisco. It is individual. It's individual to communities, but we do have this ultimately, and that's why it's a framework.
Yeah.
Because it's the framework that can be applied globally, based upon what the needs and the allocation of resources and the aspects of work and care that is being done, and how it is that needs to, and the core values that are there. I'm going to pass it on to
Maya, if you have any thoughts. Thank you.
Sure. I just want to add real quickly, I think it's important to acknowledge that the role of the U.S. and the power that the U.S. holds in terms of geographically over the global South. So while my understanding of reproductive justice and the context I personally work within are grounded in the U.S. and our history of racial oppression here, I think the framework definitely applies and is relevant to the global context. Because of the power that the U.S. holds internationally and specifically over the global South, we have to consider the ways in which U.S. intervention through things like economic warfare and genocide, for example, impact the well-being of global people and their ability to raise families if they decide to do so, as well as their ability to access reproductive care. Within the international context, we must be organizing against U.S. imperialism and climate catastrophe as another example, as well as international policies that limit access to reproductive care for anyone, for all people, but specifically oppressed people historically.
Thank you. And you guys are all so great. You guys keep leading into my next question, which is, how do dangerous policies from the US, like the Global Gag Rule and the Helms Amendment, hinder efforts to expand reproductive health and achieve reproductive justice around the world? And Dr. T, we'll start with you again.
I mean, for me, it raises fundamental questions, about, and I like what Maya says about, like, white imperialism and all of that. It's very important because the US doesn't make any attempt to even hide why they do foreign aid, right? It's to advance economic benefit for the United States, and they put money, where they make security judgments for themselves. And the question is, why does the world and everyone needs all of the security and protection and military bases all over the world? We need to talk about those things, because those are the root causes of all of these imbalances, all of these isms, I'd like to call them, right? And you see the change, when a Democratic president is elected, because they really don't push on this global gag rule, and unlike the Republican president. So there's almost this weird thing that happens. So the US will spend millions, hundreds of millions of US dollars, all right, in the global South, strengthening health systems. A lot of them will be technical advisors to the ministries of health in the poorer countries, and they will embed themselves, right, in these countries and the health systems. And during the Democratic president's term, absolutely things are moving well. The NGOs are able to do their work. The clinics are able to do their work. The HIV programs are working well. And then there's this ping pong effect that happens when a Republican president comes, to start their presidency. And in fact, you saw it with Trump. The first thing he did when he started to announce his presidency was to attack reproductive health rights, was to attack abortion rights. So it's almost like this script that they all play to, right? And the extreme Christian right-wing, politics. And so that does infiltrate. It does get in, and because they appeal to the patriarchy, right? They appeal to this conservatism that is homophobic, transphobic, racist, misogynistic, and because unfortunately humans are imperfect, they don't have to look far for allies, even on the African continent. And this is how these attitudes and stigma and discrimination and prejudice become embedded. And that's why the pushback can't just be a silent, respectable, grateful, oh, we are so grateful to be in this space. We can't be caught up in that. It has to be a proper pushback that's loud, that's strong, that's in your face. Because many of the demographics of the people, many of their programs are targeting young adolescent children. And so that's where the problem starts, is that they invest even in education. And the transphobia, the homophobia, anti-choice becomes content for them. And you see it rising even in East Africa and West Africa as well, where now not only are we now just talking about access to healthcare and the problems that come with that, we now have to seriously now talk about the issues of chastity pledges that children are being made to sign in school, virginity pledges, right, as part of HIV prevention campaigning. And so there is so much that we need to literally stay woke about. And I think because on African continent, there is this sort of need for services and care. So when someone says, we will give you these hundreds of millions of dollars, but don't do abortion, it's like, yeah, okay, it's fine. Those women are reckless anyway. So they feed into those types of ideologies and ideas and existing prejudices in people. And the problem is that even if a Democrat president comes for another 2 terms, people know what it's like to be an NGO whose funding gets cut because you decided to continue talking about abortion or referring or offering services. Currently in Kenya, we have many organizations that are unable to continue to offer comprehensive services in the manner that they were able to since the Trump presidency. And those are having real life effects, not just on patients, but on staff, healthcare professionals, because you can't stop and start your career every single time America decides to elect a different president. And my wish and my call is to say, as the American people are fighting for justice and for rights, they need to know the impact, the negative impact that the money and the foreign aid that's given to the countries around the world on their behalf. Because these are being given to us, and the tagline is that these are given to you on behalf of the American people. Now, do the American people know what their money is doing across the world? Because in the same way that we are protesting and assisting and feeling that oppression and joining globally with Black Lives Matter, we want to see the same, where we talk about these issues and we really push back loudly and strong and boldly, because these people count on our silence. They count on our silence, and that's how they've been able to do what they do. Because again, unfortunately, the stigma of abortion is such that an individual woman may not always be able to advocate and fight for her rights. She may be so self-loathing already that when anyone turns her away or speaks to her in an undignified manner, she may not always be able to stand up for her own rights, even here in South Africa. It's up to us who have the voice, who have the social capital, to be able to go in every single space and advocate and do so loudly, because we are doing it not for those who are voiceless, because people are not heard. That's the difference. They're not voiceless. They speak. They're just not heard, and they are erased. And that's how I think the global community can really move together for the common purpose.
Great, thank you. And so we're so thankful that we've gotten to hear from SisterSong and ROOTT. Maya, how can we learn more about the work that you guys are doing at SisterSong?
Sure. Yeah, first of all, thank you all so much for having me. It was incredible to share this space with you all, and I learned a lot from the other speakers. So just want to say thank you. If you want to find out more about SisterSong, our website is sistersong.net, and I can put this all in the chat. But you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at SisterSong_WOC. And if you go to our website, we also have a birth justice care fund where folks can donate if folks are interested in providing financial support for birthing people during COVID. And we also have a virtual reproductive justice 101 training that will be going live, I believe, in September. So again, you can reach out to us through our website. And I lastly just wanted to uplift that one of our summer interns, her name is Lakia Williams, started a really incredible podcast called Black Feminist Rants, which you can follow on Instagram at Black Feminist Rants. And those podcast episodes are on Spotify. And I will drop all that in the chat as well. Thank you all so much.
Perfect, thank you. And Jessica and Dorian, thank you guys also for joining us today. How can we learn and support ROOTT's work?
Oh, you can feel free to, well, one of the easiest ways to do so is just to go to our website, which is, we'll drop it in the chat as well, www.rootrj.org. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And that gives an overview of the work that we do, which, you know, ROOTT in and of itself, since we didn't give the introduction at the beginning, and we'll be just very brief, is that we work in the space of full spectrum doula support. We also work inside of the space of education and policy and advocacy. So that's the work that we're doing both on a local level, on a state level, and on a national level. And so if you have any more questions, all of that information can be you can find out more information about us on the website. And that also will lead you to our direct contact information where you can feel free to ask any types of questions that you might have. And one of us directly, or one of our amazing staff members will be able to answer those questions and lead you in other directions as far as getting other information about organizations that are like ours that are doing work throughout the US.
Great, and thank you guys so much again. And so Dr. T, how can we support global reproductive justice?
Yes, so I started today by saying that today is a historic moment. The Health Care Everywhere Act was introduced in the House of Representatives, and if it's passed, it will repeal the Helms Amendment currently in place, and this will, of course, be important for people such as myself and all the community around the world that needs support, to provide comprehensive reproductive health care services, including abortion care, because it is healthcare and it is a human right. And so, can we share this message across all our social media platforms, share with our friends, tell everybody what it's about, and when the time is right, we will, of course, get in touch with all the legislators, in Congress to make sure that this is passed. And of course, please keep in touch. We started this 23 years ago already, and we are here now. So I think it's the beginning of the next chapter, of the next phase, to really organize globally in advocacy efforts and with real life and real local benefits, as far afield as Johannesburg, as South Africa. So I hope you can keep that in mind, that this is for all of us. So your efforts are really appreciated and felt, although all over the world. And I will be available in my new role as the United Nations Special Rapporteur to the Right of Health, see how we can elevate these issues onto those global spaces. It is the first time that a Black woman has ever been appointed to that role. So we have to be unapologetic in the lanes that we use when we talk about these issues of healthcare access. And I'm really looking forward to learning from all of you. And as always, I know I can count on your support as well. Thank you so much.
Great, yeah, thank you guys again all so much for being here. And just a reminder, we just dropped that message in the chat that you can reshare and thank our Congresswomen for introducing that today and hopefully get the Helms Amendment repealed.
All righty. Thank you so much, Tricia, for moderating the panel. That was an amazing discussion, and special congrats to Dr. T for your promotion. That's very exciting, and we wish you well in that role. I just want to encourage you all to continue to educate yourselves and to remind you that it is on us to fight for reproductive justice. So thank you to all our panelists. Again, very, very informative and insightful information. Now I'm going to pass it over to Brittany, our Arizona organizer, to discuss the HER Summit. Brittany?
Yeah, Thank you. Hi, folks. Like Tina just said, my name is Brittany. I'm she, her, hers, based in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm just here today to let you know about the Her Summit. And we just had a really incredible conversation. But how do we actually make a change and do something about it? Well, we have an election coming up. And we know that this is without a doubt the most important election of our lives. We know that 4 more years of Trump means 4 more years of the deadly global gag rule and the Helms Amendment and continued attacks on our reproductive rights here and abroad. We have 97 days. 97 days, that's pretty wild. 97 days to make a difference in this election. And it's not just getting Trump out of the White House. It's maintaining the House, which we won in 2018, woo, and winning back the Senate. And it's also just those really important state legislatures, governorships, and judges. It's just imperative for this movement that we have leaders in office that fight for our right to bodily autonomy. And we need people across this country to pledge to elect pro-choice candidates up and down the ballot this November. Like I said, that's only 97 days away. It's wild. Most of you on this call have already committed to be a Fight for Her voter. Thank you so much for that. Now let's just make sure that we're ready to make the biggest difference that we can. And that's why I'm inviting you to join us at our 3rd annual Her Summit. It is going to be in 1 month. Mark your calendars. August 29th, Saturday, August 29th. It's going to be our first ever digital Her Summit. Where we'll come together and learn more about how to advocate for global reproductive rights and get out the vote skills that we can use in the election, all from the safety of our homes, which is pretty great. Since it's digital this year, we're going to split up into an Eastern Summit and a Western Summit. So both of them are going to be at 10 a.m. to 1:30 Eastern and Pacific, respectively. During the summit, you'll get to learn more about the issues we're fighting for, like repealing the global gag rule and the Helms Amendment, and rounding it out with those organizing skills you can use to help us get out the vote in November. And on top of it, we'll have a few exciting speakers you definitely won't want to miss. We'll announce those hopefully coming up soon. And you'll also get a chance to join our state breakouts, where you'll learn more about the difference or how to make a difference specifically in your state. To sign up, go ahead and head to the link that's being put in the chat right now. Hopefully something's being dropped in there. And there you can find more information about the Her Summit and apply to one of the summits. If you live in the East, like our states in Maine, New Hampshire, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, or the surrounding states, apply to the Eastern Summit. And if you live in the West, like California, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, or those surrounding states, apply to the Western Summit. And after you apply, one of our really talented fellows will follow up with you. Just make sure you apply soon, as applications are going to be accepted on a rolling basis. Thank you all so much. I'm really excited for these. 1 month. Woo.
Awesome, awesome. Really excited about the Her Summit. Make sure you go to that link right now and register to sign up to get more information. Thank you again, Brittany, and thank you again to everyone for attending this call. I just want to remind you all that you do have the power, and you can definitely make a difference in the upcoming election. And it is up to all of us to get involved. Your activism and all of our cumulative actions together that we are taking matter and do make a difference. So tomorrow you'll receive an email with the actions that we mentioned today. So look out for that. And as always, if you have any questions, please contact us and reach out. We'll be happy to answer them for you. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing you all at the Her Summit in August. Have a good day, everyone.